I hate the fact I even have a story to tell here, but it goes to show that when you're living in a major metropolitan city, you never know what walks of life you'll pass by, or drop off. So a little backstory. In 2003, I was a 16-year-old employee at an urban clothing store here on the south side of Chicago. At the time, I had a manager who was in his early 20s, Anthony. Now, Anthony was pretty arrogant and obnoxious, but overall was a pretty cool guy. I used to kind of give him shit and tease him when it came to the ladies, because he always seemed timid or too aggressive. I was, and still am, a ladies' man, so yeah, I was being an arsehole. After working at this place for about 3 months, Anthony asks me if I'll drop him off at home. It wasn't far from the direction I was headed in, so I dropped him off maybe twice a week for the next month or so. Now, let me tell you, these car rides were quite uncomfortable. This guy, as much as we spoke at work, would never speak, and sort of just keep looking straight. It got to the point where his awkwardness went from entertaining to straight creepy. Fast forward to 3 or 4 years later. I'm watching the news, and they're going into detail about a horrific crime committed by a Comcast installation worker. Apparently, the Comcast worker entered 2 homes due for an installation, raped, beat, and strangled 2 women. The real unfortunate thing is that this happened on 2 different occasions, and after the first murder, the gentleman was arrested and questioned, but released and sent back to work, which allowed him to strike again. As the picture of his mugshot flashed on the screen, I froze. It was Anthony. Now, growing up on the south side of Chicago, I've grown up and befriended a fair share of people who became murderers, but this one took the cake. A link to an article about Anthony can be found in the description below. This took place in Rhode Island when I was much younger, back in my college days. This was on the local Rhode Island news, so if you tried hunting, I'm sure you could find it. I was dating a girl that went to school in a town I won't name. It was the summer and everyone was back home. My girlfriend's best friend had an internship back in that town, and this girl had a 4-bedroom multi-family home to herself. The other 3 roommates were paying for their rooms, but chose to stay home. I guess they could only get this place if they started paying the rent 2 to 3 months prior to school starting, but whatever. One weekend, my girlfriend asks me to go to that town with her to spend some time with her friend. She's lonely and has nothing to do on the weekends. We're only like an hour away, so it sounds like a plan. We head down and we just chill for the night. It's about 2 AM, and we decide to walk out and get some cigs. Nothing special. We walk by a guy on our way home from the gas station, and he's just staring at us. Kind of creepy, but no big deal. This wasn't the best of areas, but certainly not the worst. We eventually all pass out, and me and my girlfriend head home the next day. The end of the week comes, and my girlfriend asks if I want to go and visit her friend again, but I have to work all weekend, so I decline. She heads down there alone, and her friend's boyfriend is coming over to stay as well. Pretty much a repeat of the weekend before. They all drink, but end up going out and partying a little bit. They're walking back after a night of drinking when they enter the mudroom at around 2 AM. The mudroom door had been left unlocked. They close it behind them, and there's a really raggedy looking dude in there waiting for them. He says out loud to them, "Get in the fucking house." They all turn around, and he has a gun. My girlfriend's friend has already unlocked the door to the house, and it's partially opened. Everyone is frozen in place, and the guy repeats himself, "Get in the fucking house." The boyfriend then steps forward with his hands up a little bit, trying not to seem confrontational. "Hey man, calm down. It's all good." I don't know how the fuck this dude was brave enough to do any of this. As he says that, the intruder shoots him. My girlfriend and her friend run into the house and hide under a bed. They can't hear this, but the assailant took off and didn't follow them back in. They don't know this though, and they're terrified, hiding under a bed while the boyfriend is screaming for help. They think the psycho's in the house and is looking for them. My girlfriend told me they were both silently crying under the bed while the boyfriend screamed for help. The worst part was that he was yelling, "Help me, I'm dying." The neighbours heard the gunshot and screaming, and they called the police. They ended up catching the dude. He'd been watching the girl for weeks. It was the guy we had seen watching us the week prior. Worst part was, the girl's boyfriend didn't make it. This isn't my story, but my grandma's. She told me this story after I shared an equally horrific tale of my own. I might get around to sharing that one soon. My grandmother is a part of the time period when lots of southerners were migrating to the northern states, looking for work and better pay to help out their families still living down south. This took her to New York, where she found seamstress work, and where this story takes place. I should also add that my grandma is a tough old bird, and she's very paranoid about people she doesn't really know, and situations she has no control over. So this story came as a bit of a shock to me, and kind of explains a little about why she might be so paranoid. I'll also add that she doesn't and never has taken any shit from anyone. She's about 5'9", had muscles in her 60s, still rocks a crew cut, and would kick some ass if necessary. She's not a typical granny at all, so if something scares her, it's really fucking scary. So, my grandma and her friend Judy worked down the street from each other. They were introduced by my grandma's boss, and hit it off pretty well, and they started hanging out frequently after work. My grandma said that one night they went out to a bar, just having a good old time. It was here that the men approached them. There were two of them, one tall and light-skinned, and the other shorter and darker. Judy seemed to know them, and seemed to be happy to see them. She introduced them to my grandma, and they all decided to hang out for the evening. After a while of drinking and having a good time in the bar, the men started asking Judy if her and her beautiful friend would like to come back to their house to continue the party, since the bar was going to be closing soon. My grandma declined, as she's always been paranoid, and she said the men were giving off creepy vibes all night, doing stuff like whispering when they thought her and Judy weren't paying attention, giving the general creeper stare, and the short dark man kept trying to touch my grandma's waist and wrist. She said he was ugly as hell, that he looked like an old screw-faced beagle in her own words, and that he was so short she practically towered over him. At one point, he tried to hold her hand, and she gave him her "I'll fucking kill you" face, and he let go. The tall man persisted with the after-party idea, saying they could go and play cards, and dance some more at their big, nice house. He promised others would be there as well to party and play cards. Judy, by this time, was tanked, and the man had her convinced, but she didn't want to go without my grandma. So, she proceeded to beg my grandma to come with her. She tells my grandma to stop being so paranoid and to trust her, that these guys are her friends and that they're okay. So, my grandma, against her better judgment, left with them. My grandma says they drove for a good long while, and the moment she looked out of the car window and didn't recognize anything at all, she asked the man where they were going, and all he said was, upstate. That was when she knew she was probably in trouble. The two men sat in front, and her and Judy were in the back. Judy's telling my grandma to chill out, that they're gonna have a good time. They get to the place, and it turns out the guys didn't lie. They pull up in front of a nice big house in some suburb. They go inside, and Grandma says she remembers the front door led into some long, dimly lit hallway. They were all walking in single file down the hallway in this order: the tall man, Judy, Grandma, short man. She says that at the end of the hallway there was a door that they went to, and the tall man had to stop to open the door with a key. As they waited for him to do so, she saw a big rat in a spare room off the hall run across a dirty mattress with horrible brown stains all over it. She says that this is what initially creeped her out about the house. The stains looked like dried blood, and the mattress was the only thing in the room, just lying in the middle of the floor. So, they're all waiting for the tall man to open the door, and my grandma is about 2 seconds from losing her shit. He finally gets it open. My grandma said she barely got a glimpse into the room. The door pulled out towards them, so she could see through the crack where the hinges and the frame meet. There were women of all ages in the nude, lingerie, garters, laying all over the furniture, playing cards and smoking cigarettes with men. She also heard someone screaming. My grandma screamed as well and turned and ran, knocking the short man down in the process. She was so much taller than him that she barely noticed she'd run him over. The tall man had already grabbed Judy, who was now screaming too, and with the help of another man, shoved her inside the room with the other women and slammed the door. He then turned to help the short man chase down my grandma. She said she could hear them behind her yelling things like, "Catch that bitch," and that they'd kill her when they caught her. She managed to get down the hall and out of the door, and she ran down the street screaming because she didn't know where she was, or where a train station was to get away. By the grace of God, she ran into a little old man who was opening a newsstand. He asked her what was going on, and when she pointed at the men, he pulled out a gun and started yelling at them to get the fuck away. Thankfully, they hightailed it back to wherever. The newsstand man helped her find a train station, and gave her money to help her get back to the city. My grandma never saw Judy again. Her boss told her one day that a nice-looking man came by and picked up all of her belongings from her place of work, which was also where she lived. Said he told them that Judy wouldn't be returning to work, and that she had found a new place to stay. In a nutshell, my grandma avoided being abducted into a human trafficking ring. She says this has been going on for longer than the world wants to admit. For those of you who ask why she didn't call the police, you have to understand, my grandma didn't know where they took her, or if she had been given real names. She didn't know the address or anything that would have helped her find Judy. Also, being black and from Alabama back then, she didn't have much faith that the police would do anything to help her, and was afraid of what the men might do to her for meddling. She wishes she could have convinced Judy not to go along that night, and for a long time felt guilty about being the only one who got away. I'm glad she did though. I wouldn't exist if they had caught her. I'm a blackjack dealer at a tribal casino. I've been a dealer for 13 years. In that time, I've seen some scary people, but none stand out more than this guy. Now, I'm not easily intimidated, but this guy was 6'2", medium build, dirty blonde hair, a big scar on his cheek, and he reeks of Bud Light and Winston cigarettes. He had a wife that always came in with him, and she always seemed to have fallen into something face first. Basically, he was a typical redneck arsehole. Not only was he mean to his wife, he was hateful to everyone he encountered. One day I was dealing to him, and it wasn't going very well. I think I may have taken something like 2K of his money, and that's when he started in on me, calling me things I wouldn't call my dog. When we encounter verbal abuse, we're allowed to have our pit boss remove people from the tables. My pit boss is a woman, and this guy says, "I don't let no woman tell me what to do." As security's walking him off the tables, he looks me dead in the eyes and says, "You better watch your back. I'll get my 2K from your ass one way or another." After the altercation, he was banned, but only for 30 days. Sure enough, after the 30 days, he was back in, and sitting on my next table. I ask my boss if I can avoid the table because of our past altercation. My boss tells me he'll just keep an eye on things and I'll be fine. I get to the table, and he just stares me down. I start dealing, and he's winning. About 20 minutes into my 30 minutes on the table, he says to me, "Boy, am I glad you're paying me, 'cause I've got a knife in my boot, and I was planning on stabbing your ass." After my 30 minutes were up, I immediately notified my boss what was said. Security were told, and they take him to the back. Sure enough, he has an 8-inch Bowie knife in his boot. This time he was given a lifetime ban. This might be a shorter story, but it's definitely scary, and still gives me bad thoughts when I think about it. This took place after my parents had divorced, but they live close to each other, so it wasn't all that bad. Anyway, I would frequently forget stuff at my mum's house, and would take it up to my dad's. This was almost a nightly thing. So, one night, I was bringing my Xbox and some games to my dad's house, and one thing to note is that this was one of those double houses, if that makes any sense. So, to get to my dad's house, I had to pass the neighbours' side first. While I was passing their house, the wife, I presume the wife, stopped me and asked me to come closer. I thought that since my dad sort of shared the house with her and her husband, that he knew and trusted her, so I went closer. She noticed the Xbox and games in my hands, and straight up said, "Hey, we have a bunch of fun games and little boys your age to play with here. Do you want to come in?" I slowly backed away, not turning my head to her. As I was doing so, I felt a cold, large hand on my right shoulder. My blood ran cold. I didn't dare turn around. I heard from behind me, "She isn't this nice all the time. I suggest you take her up on the offer." My fight or flight kicked in, and I chose flight. His grip wasn't all that good, so I escaped and ran inside my dad's. I didn't tell him, but I did call the police. I couldn't live knowing that they could have had multiple kids in there. A few minutes passed and a police car showed up. 5 minutes later, the 2 officers walked out of the house with the 2 people. Apparently, they'd been luring kids into their house with the promise of games and toys. I still imagine what would have happened if the man's grip was stronger, and thank God I chose to call the police. They had 2 kids inside, both boys. Hey guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to smash that like button or I'll smash you. Also, I just want to give a quick shout out to the Emerald Gore Society, who've been featuring me on their website recently. If you haven't heard about them, then you should definitely check them out through the links in the description, since they cover all things horror, so if you're interested in my videos, you'll probably like what they're doing over there too. Anyway guys, Halloween's fast approaching. I know I'm excited, I hope you are too. So I'll be preparing something for that coming up next. If you're not already subscribed, then make sure you do so that you'll get an alert for that as well. But until then, enjoy the rest of your October. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.